Good morning. I'm sorry that our technology wasn't working this morning at the center, but Pam asked me if I could give you a brief summary of what I talked about today. So, as you know, our annual theme is Rising Higher, Growing Deeper. And for the month of February, we're talking about radical interconnection, which is this idea of how we are deeply interconnected with one another and fits perfectly into our principle that we teach in Centers for Spiritual Living of oneness. And this whole month's arc is in how we can see that radical interconnection. And first, we start with this premise of oneness, this place where we're all deeply connected to the one infinite reality that is forever expressing itself as each one of us. And then to recognize those places where we don't know that. And so last week, we talked a little bit about not feeling enough and tapping into the divine enoughness so that we could really tap into a deeper understanding of ourselves and how we are connected with everything. And this week, we're looking at our biases and our beliefs that keep us separate from each other and keep us separate from our greater good. And when we become aware of those biases and hidden beliefs, that's how we begin the process of transforming them so that we can really begin to realize this beautiful idea of a world that works for everyone. And so today, the talk title is Ripples, the Art of Mindfulness, and it is an opportunity for us to begin to see our beliefs and our underlying biases that we carry and how we support them and how we can mindfully decide what it is we want to believe and how we create obstacles in the way of our highest truth. In the Science of Mind magazine, every issue, there is reprinted these declarations of principles or what we believe. It's a number of statements that Ernest Holmes made back in the early days of the Science of Mind magazine to answer the question, what is it that we believe? And so I looked at those as we were looking at this topic this week, and I think the declaration of principle statement that fits best with what I want to talk about today is we believe that the universal spirit, which we call God, operates through a universal mind, which is the law of God, and that we are surrounded by this creative mind, which receives the direct impress of our thought and acts upon it. So, in summary, we have agency and responsibility for what we create. And I know that that can feel a bit of a bitter pill to swallow if what you're experiencing right now is not something you wanted to create. Perhaps it's some hardship or some sadness. But what I want to say about that is it is the responsibility for our experience. And we step into that responsibility of having agency over what we create by recognizing that everything we experience, we either create, we promote, we allow, or sometimes we just step in stuff that isn't of our own creation, our own making. However, we're still at that point of responsibility, even when we step in an experience that we didn't create, because we are responsible for how we receive that experience. And then we come back to this space of recognizing that our responsibility comes in how we create, promote, or allow the experience we step in and how we move through it. And so we always have this opportunity to be responsible and to take responsibility at some level. Now, the art of mindfulness is practicing a heightened awareness of where we are in principle and ground ourselves before we take any action. There's a wonderful quote by Martin Luther King that he said in context with protesting of the Vietnam War. He said, the path of not hating the enemy is profoundly a spiritual path. And he went on to talk about that when we had spirituality as our guiding force and we could draw upon our ethics, that we would be able to replace hate with love. And as spiritual livers, as meditators, as people who engage in spiritual practice, we are trained in the way of seeing oneness so that we can choose intentionally about whether we want to respond to something with love or whether we will react to something with something that is unlike love. I came across Richard Rohr's model for interconnectedness. If you're not familiar with Richard Rohr, he is a wonderful Franciscan monk who is very deeply um, schooled in this idea of consciousness and oneness. And he talked about interconnectedness. He had a theory that he called the cosmic egg. And in it, he saw nested our relationship to story. And he said that at first we have our story. Now I have my story, you have your story. And then what we embed that when we choose to be conscious and step into a larger idea, we take our story, our individual story, and we begin to connect it with other stories so that we see our story of those people that we are um, immediately connected with. He goes on to say that if we are ready to enlarge our purview, that we begin to see what others' stories are and how they fit into what he would say is the story. Now, mindful living requires us to be aware of not only our own story, but the stories of others so that we can begin to see the bigger picture. And I would venture to say that rather than a cosmic egg, which is story nested in story, nested in story, we're really working with a ripple that moves outward from our center, but that there are many ripples that are moving outward from a center. And our interconnectedness is where those ripples meet. And we begin to have an opportunity to see not only our stories, but to see others' stories and how they can interact with one another. And this is, if we can do this mindfully, this is an opportunity for us to actually expand and grow and have a deeper realization of our oneness. Now, the only thing that might get in the way of this is our propensity to believe in things that separate us, namely our bias and our prejudice. And we need to consider those places where we choose to dislike or hate or not like someone because they have a different opinion or a different value than we do. And yet, with our philosophy, with the Centers for Spiritual Living, in order for us to practice oneness, we must go beyond what King said of choosing not to hate our enemies, and we must see ourselves in our perceived enemies. This reminded me of the allegory that is the underpinning of the Bhagavad Gita. It is a beautiful illustration of how we must come to terms with who we are and how we relate to each other. It starts with a story about Arjuna, who is a warrior and is charged with protecting the land that he lives in. And so he gets in his chariot and he leads his men to battle. However, when he gets to the battlefield and he looks across the way, he sees his kin. He sees his brothers and uncles and friends on the other side of the battlefield, ready to fight for their cause. And at this moment of understanding that he is needing to fight his family, he falls and collapses into the floor of the chariot, unable to go forward. Oftentimes, when I find myself in this social or public debate about values or social injustices, I too can find myself on the floor of that chariot. unable to go forward because I'm recognizing that the very people that see things from a different point of view are my kin, and I am one with them. This sacred scripture that the Hindus use and this allegory give us an opportunity to look at it from that perspective, that when we are taking a stand, when we are deeply embedded in our values, that um, there is an opportunity for us to see not only our story, but to see the other stories and where we meet or don't meet. I had an opportunity recently to correspond with an old neighbor of mine from when I lived back east. I saw this meme on Facebook, and it touched me. I live in the Southern California, where there are a lot of beautiful Hispanic individuals who are really struggling with a lot of what's going on in the country right now. And I saw this meme of a sign that said, "We are not criminals. We cook your meals, we mow your lawns, we grow your food." And I posted it because I felt like it was in solidarity to some of my beautiful neighbors who might be unjustly being villainized for their ethnicity. And yet, my neighbor began to post about illegal immigration and how wrong that is, and that I must be for drug trafficking. Well, I'm not for drug trafficking, and I'm not even for illegal immigration, but I am for standing up for my neighbors who are here legally and who are being villainized. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. My neighbor, rather than having this Facebook debate, texted me directly, and we began to have a conversation about this. And she told me the things that were important to her, and I tried to connect with her at some level, although I told her I couldn't agree with the things that were important to her. And at some point, she shared with me that her son had died of a fentanyl overdose. And when she told me that, it touched me and it opened my heart, and I could see why she felt the way that she did. And my point of sharing that story with you is it is very much the allegory of Arjuna, who comes to the battlefield and with an open mind and heart sees that he is not alone, that the people he is ready to do battle with are actually his neighbors, his family, his kin. And for me at that moment, I could humanize my relationship with Deb, and I could see past our differences, and I could see that place where we were indeed one. And I could choose to love my neighbor as opposed to standing against my neighbor. That doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with some of the opinions or points of view that she has, but I can see underneath why she has those points of view and why she might be so passionate about them. And I share this story because it helps us to recognize that there's always more to the story than our story, our individual story. And that if we're willing to come together to meet somewhere in the center where we can hear each other, that we can remember our oneness, that we can put aside our differences, we can let go of our passion and almost bordering on addiction to separateness, and step into a place of mindful oneness where we might be able to move forward together. We may still need to do battle at some point. There's a lot going on in our country right now, and I'm very concerned, as I imagine you are. And we may be concerned for the same reasons or different reasons. But what I do know is that when I choose to do my spiritual practice and ground myself in principle, that there will be a point where I can see past my story. I can hear your story, and then maybe we can begin to build a story together that is bigger than the both of us. So, my invitation this week is to consider what lies beyond your own chariot as you go to battle, as you take up your sword, as you take up whatever it is that's important to you. I invite you to go within, to be mindful, and to be willing to see beyond your own story to what might be waiting for you to discover and understand, so that a bigger reality, a bigger story can be birthed by means of us. Thank you very much.